Okay, so today we're just going to have a little talk through of question 3 on English language paper 1, the AQA paper. This is the new revised paper for 2025 onwards. The only difference is between these and any other past papers you might be trying is that here you're specifically given a direction to take this question in. Previously it was just how has the writer structured the text to interest the reader. So this is actually better for the student, these sorts of questions. So we're just going to focus on these newer papers. Question 3, as you can see, is focused on structure, and it's one that students tend to find quite difficult because it's not something that you've got a lot of experience analysing. It's quite different to analysing language techniques. So we're just going to really unpack what we should be thinking about here, what we should be focusing on, and how to answer these questions. So I'll just give you some time now to pause this and read the extract. So pause this, have a read, and then we'll start to think about how we're going to analyse this. Okay, so when I am looking at these sorts of texts, the first thing that I want to focus on is how does the text start? What is the first line of the extract and why is it significant? So here we can see our first line is, it was the hyena that worried me. So we're immediately introduced to an animal, hyena. We suspect that this is going to be the focus of the text. Just the first thing that's in our mind. We also have this verb, worried, which immediately creates a sense of tension, a sense of worry. We want to know why the hyena is worrying the narrator. We move down here, have some perspective shift. So its appearance is being described to us now. So we're unlocking more information about this hyena. You can zoom into the language in these types of questions. You can talk about how it's described as being ugly beyond redemption. So we can point out that this word redemption has religious connotations. You can talk about that you don't have to strictly stick to structure as long as you link it back to the fact that this is a change in perspective, it's a shift in focus, and why does that build tension for the reader? So it builds tension because we now have unlocked more information about the hyena, more reasons to be concerned basically. So on that same train of thought, down here we have another focus shift to the behaviour. So this just builds a richer image. Again, thinking about why is this important? What is significant about this? We have more and more reason to be concerned. So its appearance is described to us. We can see that it's really ugly beyond redemption. All parts together look dog-like, but like no dog anybody would want as a pet. We have this comparison. We're allowed to draw this comparison between what we know a dog to look and behave like, and form this contrast in our minds. But then told about its behaviour, which builds a lot of tension. Its behaviour sounds really concerning. So all of these things after the other just keep building more tension. So there's a lot more things that you can pick out if you want, but remember this isn't a huge amount of marks for the question. So we just want 2 or 3 really strong points. So I'm going to shift now down towards the end of the text. We can see here we have almost a resolution. So we can see the hyena has calmed down. This could almost be a happy ending for the text. But to get a really high level critical analysis of things, which in the mark scheme they love, we want to take it one step further. We want to say, well, on the one hand, this could be interpreted as a resolution to the text, but we've had to think about the first line of the text, so let's also have a think about the very final line of the text and why it's significant. We can see here that our final line in the text is that it did not move from the restricted space for the rest of the day. So again, just thinking about that really critical analysis, our final phrase here is for the rest of the day. This almost creates a cliffhanger we only have this resolution. This restricts the period of time that we have this resolution for, and it leaves you thinking, what happens next? So it creates this question in the reader's mind, again, increasing tension. So we could argue that we have a small dip in tension at the end of the text as the hyenas calm down. This is what was causing the tension in the beginning and middle of the text. This sort of unknown, we didn't know what the hyena was going to do. We have this resolution, we know what it's doing, we're satisfied that it's done. However, we only know that this is for the rest of the day. Okay. Now, moving on to actually answering the question. This is what we want to be thinking about and what we want to be talking about in our response. So, how does the text progress and what devices are used to progress the text? For example, focus shifts or sentence type. So here you can see we have a lot of focus shifts. Generally speaking, this advice applies for every single question about structure. Sentence types are usually nice and easy to look for. So for example, an example that I always come back to is if you were writing a story about maybe somebody being chased or in a really tense situation, you'd have really short sentence types as they make the text flow quicker, and it sort of mimics that pace of the story and that anxiety that the character will feel. We also want to think about how does the text start and end, which we have done. Any structural features, for example, a cliffhanger or a cyclical structure. So we sort of identified a cliffhanger here. We all know what a cliffhanger is. It's when you end a text with a lot of suspense. A cyclical structure is where the beginning of the text and the end of the text are the same. So we sort of have this sense that the text has gone round in a circle. We haven't actually progressed. When we're thinking about these things, we always want to be thinking about why. Why is this being done? What effect does it have on the reader? Why is this significant? So picking out a technique is great, but remember for our petal paragraphs, the analysis is just as important, if not the most important part. This is where you get your marks. So the analysis is all about unpacking the why this has been done. Okay, so to answer this question, we're just going to use the exact same petal structure that we always do. So we know that this is point, evidence, technique, analysis, link. So our first section here, this is going to be our point. We always know that in our point, we need to reference the question. So if the question is, how has the writer structured the text to create tension? We're going to say the writer has created tension by. So here I've said the writer has used a variety of structural features. So I'm acknowledging that I'm about to discuss the structure of the text to create tension. Again, bearing in mind that that is the point of the question, that's what we're going to be exploring. And then I've said, for example, opening the extract with a short statement that instantly antagonises the hyena. So to antagonise someone means to sort of portray them as a villain. So a trick here is to make sure that you are actually making a point. If you're just saying the writer has used a variety of structural features to create tension, that's not necessarily a point. You want to say how or by doing what. So we're going to sort of briefly acknowledge what we're going to expand upon in our evidence, technique, analysis, link section. Okay, after that we move on to our evidence, technique and analysis section. These should always come in hand in hand. You shouldn't pick out evidence if you're not going to analyse it. You shouldn't try and analyse without picking a technique. If we pick out evidence, we need to immediately pick out a technique and we immediately need to analyse. You need to do this really mindfully. So when you're picking out evidence, pick things that you can specifically identify techniques in and that you think you're going to have a lot to say. This is how you're going to make sure you're really hitting those marking points. So here, this is my evidence. The technique that we picked out is here, and this is my analysis. So what we've said here is that the opening line, it was hyena that worried me, immediately draws focus to the animal. The verb, worried, establishes the tone of the text as one of anxiety, causing the reader to feel apprehensive about what happens next. So this is sort of an example of what I said earlier in the video, that you can pick out these language techniques as long as you show how they are relevant to the structure. So the key thing that was relevant here was that this is establishing the tone of the text. text. So this is the first thing that comes into our mind. This is what we take through the rest of the text with us, this sense of worry. And then in your analysis, it's really, really, really important that you talk about the effect on the reader. So you always want to acknowledge the reader and link that back to the question. Again, this is just making sure that we hit those marking points. Finally, we have our link section. So your link can be used in multiple different ways. What I've done here is I've linked it back to the question. So again, this is just to keep your answers really clear, nice and straightforward. Remind the examiner that you are answering the question, that you are answering this through the lens of tension as you're being asked to do, and just really wrap your question up nicely. You could link this to more evidence if you felt that there was something else that was relevant to your original point. So you could sort of link this to another quote from the first paragraph, linking this back to the fact that this is how we're introduced to the text and the significance of that in terms of the structure. Or you could link it to a completely different point, but usually I like to just link it back to the question, wrap everything up nicely and keep it nice and clear. Okay, and here's just a full response that I've written out, still following this petal structure. I've said, as the text progresses, the writer builds tension by revealing more information about the hyena, for example, its appearance and behaviour. We're given a long list of unattractive features of the hyena, such as its high forehead like that of a bear. The use of the list causes the reader to be able to form a vivid image of the hyena, and the simile, like that of a bear, reminds the reader that this animal is capable of violence and danger. The tension in the text reaches a climax as the narrator describes how the hyena paces around the boat, causing him to fear for his life. The statement, "it started running in circles again," creates a cyclical structure in the middle of the text, allowing the reader to feel the constant stress and fear that the narrator does as we begin to question how this will end. There appears to be a reduction in tension at the end of the text as the hyena calms. It did not move from the restricted space for the rest of the day. However, despite the apparent relief, the phrase "for the rest of the day" creates a cliffhanger as it restricts the time frame of the resolution and leaves the reader worrying about what happens next.